Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Hillingdon in West London to Southall. This ride takes about half an hour and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes around 45 minutes and requires a change of bus, so it makes a lot of sense to cycle this one. It's a lot quicker and a really nice ride. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, then you can find a link to our Patreon page in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting by the parade of shops on Long Lane and we're going to turn straight down Granville Road. Hillingdon is quite a sprawling place and I usually like to start my videos in town centres of the places I'm going to and from. In this case I picked this parade of shops as it was pretty near the tube station and also had a little bit of a commercial centre to it. I don't really know Hillingdon that well, so if anyone lives around here and thinks there's a better place to start videos in Hillingdon, do let me know in the comments below. For the first stage of our route, we're just going down Granville Road, which is a reasonably quiet residential street, although there is a bit of traffic and it can feel a bit narrow in points due to parked cars on both sides of the road. The parking isn't very heavily used on there, so it would make sense to me to rationalise it all onto one side of the road, which means there would be fewer pinch points. That wouldn't just benefit cyclists, but motorists would be able to pass each other on there without having to wait. After turning off left at the end of Western Avenue, we join this cycle path, which has cycling on the left side and pedestrians on the right hand side. The pedestrian side of the path in particular is a little bit narrower than it should be, as the vegetation's kind of been left to overgrow there, so it would be great to see that trimmed back a little bit to restore some of the width. On the plus side though, it does have street lighting, so although it's a little bit out of the way, you don't have to worry about coming down there at night. It should be reasonably well lit. This path quickly pulls alongside Western Avenue, which is a massive A road that cuts through northwest London. There's no getting around the fact that standing beside such a busy road like this is not a particularly pleasant place to spend your time. However, from a cycling point of view, it's a perfectly comfortable place to ride a bike. You've got quite a nice wide path here and you're separated from that fast moving traffic by a pretty substantial curb and sometimes even a grass verge as well. The surface of the path is a little bit on the rough side, although it does vary as you go down it. Some bits are definitely smoother than others. Our route today really has four main sections. The first is this path alongside Western Avenue, which more or less continues like this for a few minutes. Then we'll take another slightly more scenic shared path along a quieter road, which I'll show you next. After that, there are some excellent protected cycle lanes running along the Parkway, which I've used in a couple of videos in this part of West London before. And finally, we'll pick our way through some quieter streets and approach Southall from the north, with the aid of a particularly interesting bridge, which I have some thoughts about. Now, this cycle lane isn't exactly bustling with people on bikes, but I was actually quite surprised to see a few people using it when I came down here. I genuinely thought that I would be basically on my own. I do think that this kind of path is really what you should have at the minimum next to a fast road like this. And while it's not exactly the most pleasant leisure cycling route, you can get up a lot of speed on here, which means it's a really fast link, and I would have no qualms about commuting down here on a regular basis. It's a really fast and direct way to get to where we need to go. One thing that you should be aware of going down here is that while it's mostly continuous and uninterrupted, there are one or two side roads with very low traffic on them, and you should keep an eye out on them just in case a vehicle is backing out or pulling into them as you cross. Another thing to be aware of is that as we come to the end of the path and join the slip road, it does narrow a bit and turns into a shared path with pedestrians. I haven't actually seen any pedestrians walking up here, and I think it's pretty unlikely that you'll run into any when you cycle down here, but if you do, obviously just make sure you're courteous and give them priority as they have as much right to be here as you do. The very last section of this path also turns into more of a pavement than a path. You can see here on the slip road that we're just separated from traffic by a curb rather than a verge, which is not ideal and makes you feel a little bit closer to the cars than you'd otherwise like to be. But it's perfectly safe. And crucially, you don't actually have to mix with traffic, which is, I think, the important thing here. There's a point of interest here. On the left is actually the Polish War Memorial roundabout, and the reason it's called that is because there's a war memorial to the Polish airmen who fought in the British Royal Air Force during the Second World War. I at first thought it was quite a strange place to put the war memorial, but apparently the location is because it's very close to RAF Southall, which was the airbase where 7 of the Polish manned fighter squadrons were based during the Second World War. Now, as you've probably noticed, we've left the Western Avenue and we joined West End Lane. This is a much smaller road, although I still wouldn't want to cycle on the carriageway, and just as well we've got this shared path running alongside. This isn't top of the line cycle infrastructure, but it does a reasonable job. I'm not a huge fan of shared paths running along roads, and I much prefer protected cycle lanes, but I think this one and the previous one we were on tickle the boxes for a reasonable shared path. That is, there is reasonably low pedestrian footfall and not a huge number of side roads, although we have just crossed one. This section here is definitely the worst part, where you're forced to squeeze past a telegraph pole and a hedge that really needs trimming. But overall, it's a reasonable experience and one that I think anyone could cycle along. The last good point about it is that the path is separated from the road mostly by a full verge rather than just being a pavement, and between the low footfall, the relative lack of busy side roads and the verge, I think it means that it's the sort of path that I'd be happy recommending people use. The surface isn't brilliant, and in some bits it's a little bit torn up with tree roots and rather bumpy, and as usual the vegetation could do with some cutting back to restore some of the width. In the long run, I'd love to see this replaced with protected cycle lanes. You can see there's plenty of cross-hatching in the middle of the road there, so lots of extra space that you'd be able to fit in cycle lanes there. However, for now, it does a reasonable job of getting us to where we need to go. As we near the end of West End Lane, it does split off into a separate cycle path, and it heads down into this roundabout. This is the White Hart roundabout, and it's a great piece of cycling infrastructure that was put in when the main roads were constructed around here. It has an underpass which leads to this sort of central section, and we want to take the first right out of another underpass. I love pieces of infrastructure like this. They were usually built as part of major road projects, and it's always a surprise to see them in places where there isn't really much else in the way of cycling provision. Now, Radcliffe Way has a bit of an issue, which is that we want to turn off down one of these side roads on the left, but they don't have names, so it's quite difficult to explain which one we want. But the easiest way is to remember that we want the 4th turn, so just count those left turns as you go down there and pick the 4th one, and you'll find this little cycleway entrance to another protected cycle path, which goes into yet another major underpass. This is the Kittiwake Road subway, and although it's a really useful piece of infrastructure, it could really do with a resurface and a bit of a weed as well, as it's in a bit of a state of disrepair, but it's a really useful connector to this nice pleasant shared path that we're going down. If this path looks a little bit isolated for you, just remember that there are plenty of exits to the houses on the left on those cul-de-sacs, and you can also see that there's street lighting along here, so it shouldn't be too difficult at night. It would be nice to see it taken better care of, especially in terms of the plants. And there's also a unfortunate fly tipping location around here, which is a real mess. Now, you may notice that the caption keeps popping up the Parkway, and if you know this area, you'll know that the Parkway is a really major highway. These paths actually run parallel to that major road, although there is a strip of woodland on our right between us and the main road, so you can't actually see it. Generally, I like the design with the separate cycle path and the curb protected pavement for pedestrians, so that pedestrians and cycles don't have to mix. However, there's pretty much always a lot of leaves and branches and stuff in the cycleway, and the surface could also do with a resurface. It's kind of mixed quality. Some bits are quite good, but other bits have suffered from serious erosion on the surface, so it's not always the smoothest ride. We then get put out onto Friar Road. Friar Road doesn't go anywhere for motor traffic. It's got no through route on it, so it's nice and quiet. If this route looks a bit confusing, it really shouldn't do. We're actually just running parallel to the parkway. It's just that the cycle route is a bit inconsistent and switches between quiet streets and protected lanes, and also requires you to cross the road in underpasses and such at various points, so it can be a little bit difficult to follow. The real solution to that should be that TfL or a local authority should put some wayfinding along here to direct you the right way. A cycleway designation and some cycleway signs I think would be really helpful for remembering which way to go. You may notice that there are a few points where I've actually paused in the video and the video is skipped, and that's because there are a couple of points where even I, who planned this route, have had to stop and check my map. Until some wayfinding gets put in here, what you can do is look in the description of this video, and I've got a map of this route which you can download from Komoot and stick on whatever device or app you use. It's in a GPX format, which is a standard format, and hopefully that should make the wayfinding a little bit easier. Aside from clearing the vegetation and resurfacing these paths, it would also be nice to have a little bit of paint on them just to show that they're two-way cycle paths, maybe a centre line or something like that. As they are kind of narrow, they're probably about the width that you'd expect a one-way cycle path to be, so it's good to have a reminder that there might be someone coming the other way on a bike as well. I'd love to know the history of why the parkway has ended up with such an extensive network of cycle lanes along it. It's definitely really atypical for a British A road of that kind, so if anyone has any ideas, please do let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to find out. So we're now in the final stage of this video, which I mentioned at the beginning, and that is that we're going to be picking our way through some residential streets and hopefully emerging to the north of Southall. The layout of this housing development actually makes it a natural low traffic neighbourhood, so there isn't actually any through traffic on these streets because there are simply no through routes. They are relatively quiet at most times, but you may notice that it doesn't feel like quite the most comfortable cycling environment. I think that has a lot to do with the heavy amount of on-street parking, which kind of narrows the road a little bit. In this sort of situation where there are so many parked cars that it's making it difficult to use the street, the right tool for the job is to introduce a controlled parking zone. That would generally tidy up the public realm around here and just make the streets a little bit more comfortable to use. This street that we're on is actually filtered in an unusual way. There is a bridge at the end of the street. It's nice in that it means cars can't use it as a through route, but we can still walk and cycle from one part of the street to the other. It's not the best design though. I say it's a bit narrow, and those chicanes make it difficult to cycle across, so if the council did get round to it, it would be great to see it rejigged just to make it a bit more comfortable to pass through. Incidentally, there is a lot of pavement parking on this street, and I'm not sure that it's the kind that's been allowed by the council. It just seems like people have parked up there. Now, there is actually another bridge at the end of this street, which is called Spikes Bridge, and you can't cycle over it, so I'm going to dismount and walk on the path here. You can see that no cycling sign on the right there. I try to avoid having dismount sections in my videos because I know that, say, disabled cyclists often can't dismount, but unfortunately I couldn't find a way around this one. Now, this path is a real mess, and you can also see that there's a number of guys walking around here like zombies, and I will leave it to your imagination to guess what they are up to. It's a shame that these paths have been left to get into such a state, and that no cycling sign and chicanes have been left in, because this could be an incredibly useful link from that natural low traffic neighbourhood and those protected cycle lanes right into the centre of Southall. It's Ealing Borough Council that runs the show around here, and I really think they should take a look at this section. There's a big opportunity to improve here. Yes, the cycle route but also the public realm around the canal, and turn this into a place that people actually want to spend time in. It would be money well spent. Now, which way we turn as we exit the path depends exactly where in Southall you want to go. You could turn right there and head straight for the western end of the Broadway, but I want to get right into the centre of town, so I'm heading down Spikesbridge Road just a bit further, and then I'm going to turn off into Northcote Avenue. It's then a relatively straightforward journey just down here until we get right into the centre of the Broadway, right in the middle of Southall. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube so that you get more of my videos on your YouTube homepage. And if you like what we're doing and you want to help promote it, just hit that like button as well, as it really does boost the video in YouTube's algorithm and it helps more people find the channel. And here's my massive thank you again to everyone who helps support the channel financially on our Patreon page. If you like what we're doing and you want to support it, you can find a link to the Patreon in the description below the video and chuck us a couple of quid a month. Many thanks to those of you who do so already. And now we've found our way right into the middle of Southall. So to review that route, I think it's pretty good. As we just discussed, there are a couple of bits that could do with improvement. Those cycle lanes along the Parkway could be maintained better. Spikesbridge really needs redoing but has a lot of potential. And that section along Western Avenue, it's not the prettiest one, but it gets you where you need to go without having to mix with traffic. Do let me know in the comments what you think of that one, what you'd improve, and maybe if you'd go a different way. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye!